and had some profound realizations. For instance, that the soul is indestructible, it is immeasurable, it is the eternal living entity which will never come to an end. The body, however, has an end. The conclusion was that the body doesn't live forever and the soul never dies. Well, after that, we had talked about whether the soul can kill or not. Then the conclusion was that the soul is neither killed nor can kill someone. Today we are going to take up 2.20. That is a beautiful poetic shloka. Let me recite it to you, but before that, let's first say our prayers. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjan Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshitarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Chant and be happy. Well, you'll have to do it to believe it. So today, 2.20, an iconic verse from Bhagavad Gita. Na jayate mriyate va kadachin nayam bhutva bhavita va na bhuya ajo nityaha shashvatoyam purano na hanyate hamyamane sharire. Isn't it beautiful? It translates as, Srila Prabhupada's translation, for the soul there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn. Go your daily capsule of spirituality in 15-20 minutes. Well, it doesn't take so much to become spiritual. Because to become spiritual is to become oneself. As they say, we are not human beings undergoing a spiritual experience. We are actually spiritual beings undergoing a human experience. So to speak, the human experience is temporary. The spiritual experience is permanent. So, moving from the material human experience to spiritual experience. Today we will take up shloka number 2.20. A beautiful verse that I would sing for you. But before that, let me say the prayers. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjan Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshitarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivas Adi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. The magic mantra, chant and be happy. You will have to do it to believe it. The shloka number 2.20. Na jayate mriyate va kadachin nayam bhutva bhavita va na bhuya ajo nityaha shashvatoyam purano na hanyate hanyamane sharire. For the soul, translation by Srila Prabhupada, for the soul there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever-existing, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. Isn't that a beautiful poetic translation as well as beautiful as the shloka? Well, the purport is just as substantial. It will make us familiar with so many facts that somehow or the other we probably knew by instinct. But today we find the validation of it in Srila Prabhupada's very powerful purport. Now Srila Prabhupada starts in his purport by saying that qualitatively this small atomic soul, that is we, the Jivatma, is similar to the Supreme Lord or the Supreme Soul. That is, qualitatively we are very, very much similar. But of course, quantitatively we can never parallel that. Then Srila Prabhupada goes on to tell us that the soul is absolutely steady. That means it does not undergo any changes like the body does. And that is why the soul is also called Kutastha. Kutastha means steady. Now, why is the soul being called steady here? Let's understand. The body, for instance, undergoes 6 types of transformations. We have all actually encountered. This is nothing new for us. The body is first born. It comes into being. It remains for some time. It grows. Then it produces some byproducts, namely the children. And then it gradually dwindles. It starts to age, decline. And then finally, it just ceases to be. It vanishes into oblivion, as Srila Prabhupada writes. Vanishes into oblivion. Now, how profound does that sound? To understand that this body that we are so attached with and that we identify with so strongly at this point of time is going to vanish into oblivion. Nobody is going to know where this body went. It will be broken up into these tiny material atoms and molecules. It will just vanish. The atoms and molecules will become a part of the Mother Nature's elements, and eventually be recycled into somebody else's body maybe. So this body per se really doesn't have an identity of its own. On the contrary, Srila Prabhupada tells us the soul doesn't have these kind of transformations. The soul was never born. Well, that's very difficult to understand, because we are so much used to the idea of birth and death. We are so much used to the idea of having a past, present and future. We are so much used to having the idea of time around us that we cannot imagine what is eternity or timelessness. The soul is a transcendental entity. It's a part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that is the reason why it does not come into the jurisdiction of time or Kal, as we call it. The soul doesn't have a past, a present or a future. The soul was never born and it will never die, which means it was always there, existing along with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and will always continue to exist. And therefore, this shloka is, putting a final stamp on the concept of eternality of the soul. That the soul is eternal, no doubt. And, if you recall, Arjun had various objections to fighting, and the first objection was that he was feeling compassionate towards his relatives, towards his teacher, his grandfather Bhishma. This argument of compassion is now being, completely answered by Krishna in the verses number 11 to 30. This part is actually dealing with the Gyan, the Sankhya of who you are. Who am I? I am a soul. I am not the body. What is the nature of the body? What is the nature of the soul? And how are we related to the Supreme Person? So this part of 11 to 30 verses, chapter number 2, is countering the argument of Arjun in which he said he was feeling compassionate. Now Krishna is again and again telling Arjun, look Arjun, it is a soul which is eternal. Nobody can kill him. It was never born. It will never die, And that's for the argument that compassion is stopping you to fight is actually baseless. See, the soul, as Srila Prabhupada beautifully explains in his purport, that it is never born. Now, we are actually used to the idea of somebody coming into this world. That means is born, coming into the body. Actually, the body is made around the soul. So when the soul has to take on another body, the body is transformed. The matter is transformed over the soul, over the desires and the karmic reactions that it carries from the previous birth. And the body is born, but the soul is not. The soul merely changes bodies from one to another to the next one. Then, when the soul just changes the body, we say that it is actually ever existing, right? There was never a time it was not there, and there will never be a time when it will cease to exist. It is primeval. Primeval means it is Purana. Purana means the oldest. I mean, it is an entity which has been existing for time immemorial, or rather we should say timeless way. In a timeless way, there's no concept of time with the soul. And though it's so old, it is ever fresh and ever new, because soul has no birth and no death. It also doesn't have any aging. It doesn't deteriorate like the body. The body does. We see as soon as we reach our late 20s or maybe even earlier, it said that the aging starts right from the time of our birth. So we see that slowly the body starts to go down in its functionality, and then we start seeing the visible signs of aging, like this, the whitening hair, the graying, head mask that we have up there. Then we have the wrinkles slowly coming up, the crow's feet on the corner of the eyes. We actually cannot deny the signs, the definite signs of aging as we move on in our life. So the body has to deteriorate. It's a characteristic. It's a transformation of the body. But the soul never deteriorates. It never ages. And as we saw, that the body will, produce some byproducts, some effects it will produce. And what are the effects? The body will actually reproduce another body for another soul to take on. You see, we have to understand this concept that a body actually produces another body by reproduction, but into the offspring or into the progeny, into the child, the soul is not reproducing to send its own child. You see, the soul will never produce its children. Soul never produces any byproducts. So, which soul comes to inhabit the child or the new being which is developing in the mother's womb? It is another individual soul which has been sent by the laws of material nature to inhabit that body according to his desires and his karma. So, we, our relatives, our children, our grandchildren, all are individual souls, though we seem related by body, but we are individuals in our own rights. One soul is never a child of another soul. A Jivatma can never produce another Jivatma. Only the Paramatma, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, can produce new Jivatmas. So that is the difference between the small atomic soul, or called the Anu Atma, that is we, and the super soul, that is the Param Atma. As is one more difference, which is very, very striking, is that the Paramatma is always in knowledge. Paramatma is actually a manifestation of Krishna himself. It's a partial manifestation of Krishna himself, which means Krishna sends, his manifestation to live in our bodies along with the soul to help it out. So that's actually a symbol of mercy. How much compassion and the mercy the God has towards us. He never leaves us alone. He comes and sits here along with the soul in order to guide it at all points of time. So So the soul is likely to forget his real nature like we have forgotten. The soul is likely to forget that it is eternal, it is unborn, it is indestructible, it is by nature very, very blissful, and it has nothing to do with the pains and the sufferings of this material world. We have forgotten all of that because we are minute souls and we are forgetful by nature, as Srila Prabhupada tells us. But the super soul or the Paramatma is always in knowledge. He never forgets himself and he reminds us. He's there always with us in the form of Paramatma to remind us that we are also eternal and blissful beings. That is a mark of his compassion towards us. Now, a very beautiful shloka from the Katha Upanishad has also been quoted here by Srila Prabhupada, which is very similar to the one in Bhagavad Gita. Now, that shows you the, I would say, the compatibility in the ideology of the Vedic literature. So, this shlok reads like, Na jayate mriyate va vipaschin nayam kutaschin na babhuva kaschit ajo nityaha shashvatoyam purano na hanyate hanyamane sharire. So as we see in this shloka, the last two lines of it are actually identical to the shloka in the Bhagavad Gita 2.20. We just spoke that. In the first two lines, there's a slight bit of a difference, but a very important word that comes up here is vipaschin. That is knowledge. That by nature, actually, soul is also knowledgeable, but it tends to forget. However, the super soul is always knowledgeable and it never forgets. That's a very beautiful difference which has been brought out by Srila Prabhupada in this very, very beautiful purport. Also, there is another verse which is being quoted here in the Katha Upanishad, from the Katha Upanishad, which tells us that we are Anu Atmas, we are very small souls. And Paramatma is always there to guide us because he's always present in the region of the heart. Now, this is something that we talked about in the earlier purports of Srila Prabhupada also, in which he goes on to tell us. In fact, in several verses quoted from the Upanishads, Shvetashvatara Upanishad, for instance, we saw that the soul is very, very small. It is 1 by 10,000th of the tip of a hair. And it is located somewhere in the region of the heart, right? And here again is also located along with the tiny atomic soul, the Paramatma or the super soul. He's also situated here. Now, you see, if you've ever noticed this, logically, it's commonsensical, that whenever we refer to ourselves, we automatically tend to place our hand on our heart. Now, why do you think is that? That's because somewhere inside we know that I am the soul which is present somewhere here in the region of the heart. You say, okay, you talk to me. When we are maybe sometimes arguing with somebody, we always say, talk to me, I will tell you, So we always refer to ourselves as placing our hand on the heart. And that actually gives you an idea that somewhere instinctively we know that our soul is present here in the region of the heart. Now in the Katha Upanishad and also previously quoted example in one of the purports from the Mundakya Upanishad, it's been said that the Atma and the Paramatma, which are residing in the region of the heart, are like two birds sitting on the tree. You see? So what are they doing there? One of the bird, the Atma, is always looking at the attractive fruits on the tree around him. And he's sometimes attracted to this fruit, sometimes attracted to that fruit, which means he's attracted to the material desires. And then the other one, the other bird who is the Paramatma, he's actually just looking at the first bird, waiting him to turn towards him so that he can guide him out of this entanglement of material existence. He's just waiting for us to head towards him and listen to what he's trying to say to us so that he can tell us the reality that you are an eternal being. get out of this material entanglement, become free. But it's also said in this verse that the person who becomes free of material desires and lamentation, which means, we are continuously caught in the cycle of wanting something and then crying for it if we don't get it. So desiring and lamenting, desiring and lamenting, desiring and lamenting, that becomes a vicious circle of our lives. And that is what keeps us entangled in the material existence. So it said somebody who can just look beyond this, who's beyond this material desire and lamentation, by the grace of God, can begin to understand what soul really is, what he or she really is. Well, he and she really are, symbolic of only the body, So the soul is actually an eternal being and blissful being. This is what the Paramatma is trying to tell us, sitting here, residing in our heart, always looking towards us to guide. But we sometimes, many times, just choose to ignore. Well, I'll just ask you to, do this small exercise with me, just a little bit of thinking. Many times when you're about to do something, sometimes something which is a little questionable with respect to morality, we have lots of voices speaking inside us, One voice tells us, okay, go ahead and do this. The other one says, no, don't do it. It's wrong. The third one must say, well, it's all right if I do it. The other person has also done it, So there are so many voices talking to us from our inside. Have you wondered what these voices are? Actually, sometimes it is the mind speaking to us. Well, almost always, the mind is trying to attract us into doing things for, sense gratification, for fulfilling our desires, our material desires. So he says, okay, let's go ahead and do this. Let's go drive, say, 10 kilometers to this sweet shop or this ice cream shop and have that ice cream, The otherwise tries to tell us, the intelligence, for instance, tries to tell us, well, it doesn't make any sense, to drive to such a distance just to have one ice cream, And then similarly, we have so many voices. One instance I would just like to give here, sometimes when a person is faced with a situation in which he has to kill someone. You must have seen it in the movies. When he picks up the revolver for the first time to kill somebody, his hand is shaking like anything, And the voice is speaking from inside, don't do it, it's wrong, it's murder, it's not right. But the first time we choose to ignore it, that inner voice, which is also called the conscience, is actually the voice of the Paramatma, So when we choose to ignore the voice of the Paramatma or the conscience, one time, two times, and a number of times, slowly that voice starts to die down. Not because Paramatma stops speaking to us, but because the other voices grow louder. The voice of the mind grows louder, and we cannot hear the voice of the Paramatma anymore. But the people who are spiritually realized can actually hear Paramatma speaking to them from inside them. So next time we're ever about to make a decision, ever about to do something, let's try to listen out to that inner voice, which is Paramatma's voice. But it'll also do well for us not to confuse every voice from inside as the voice of Paramatma, because there are a lot of voices inside and we must learn to distinguish between them. Well, so long for today. Today we will take a break here, but do go through these beautiful purports of Srila Prabhupada, who are giving us this eternal knowledge, that knowledge which will actually put us out of illusion. It will actually help us be blissful at all times, whatever the external circumstances are. Till then, chant Hare Krishna and be happy.